John Knox, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
49 years in radio.
At this stage, if I'm still on the fringe of radio, but it's a little bit longer than that. It was 1957, August of that year, that I started at 2RG at Griffith.
Tell us about those days, back in the early days of, the halcyon days of radio.
Well, I guess they were the end of the halcyon days of radio, because television had just started to come in Melbourne and Sydney in 1956, 59 in Brisbane, and although I'm talking about New South Wales at this stage because that's where I started, we still had radio shows, Jack Davey show, Bob Dyer. A lot of people would never have heard of those names.
A lot of the serials as well, Dad and Dave.
That's what I should have brought here to show you. Dad and Dave, When a Girl Marries, and all these things, Search for the Golden Boomerang, they were all on large discs about that size, 16 inches. And you had to have a large turntable to play them on, and all studios had them. They'd last for about 12 and a half minutes, and it gave you enough time to put in commercials to bring it up to the quarter hour, and that was that. It's a wonderful time, because I think it was Stan Freberg. He pushed the radio barrow in the States and also here. He loved radio. He referred to radio as the theatre of the mind, and it certainly is.
Or as Kevin Goldsby said, the mindless.
Now there's a name. Kevin is still going.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know whether he's active, but as far as I can remember, he was still going strong, perhaps less strong than he used to, like all of us, only about 12 months ago. A tremendous voice. And I can remember when I started off in the business, my mentor at 2RG said, if you can sound like that guy, you'll never be short of a job in the broadcasting business. And I started to study what he did with his voice. And I'm shocked to say that these days, in 2021, especially radio newsreaders, they don't do anything with their voices. The majority of them don't. There are exceptions, of course, but they seem to be journalists first.
If that.
That's a dirty word. You don't need to be a journalist to work in a newsroom. You just need to have a brain, and if you've got that and a nose for news, then you're halfway there. But so many newsreaders these days, to me, sound as though it's just words off a piece of paper. I can get that just by picking up the paper. I need someone to tell me the news, explain the news, and use the voices that they've been given with to get into your cerebellum, if you like, because they just don't do it. In my day, back when I was a boy, all that stuff that bores people to tears, we were already radio announcers. We played records, we read commercials, we sold commercials, we sold the idea of somebody going into somebody's shop to buy something. We'd create the floor traffic in the shop, as it were, and it'd be up to the shopkeeper to complete a sale if there was going to be one. But from there we graduated. Those of us who wanted to go to news did so. We'd already been given the gift of communication, the understanding of what you can do with your voice. I mean, how many people do you know that talk in a very narrow speech, not pattern, boundaries, if you like, when they've got a very deep, they can go right down low, and then they can go right up high.
But a lot of people don't have what you have.
Hang on a sec. There have been some. It's not the voice that you have. It's what you do with your voice. That's it. I mean, you know that yourself. You've read news. You've read news with me in a couple of stations, and you wouldn't have been on the air if it hadn't been for the fact that you knew how to communicate and use your voice. It's sometimes you need to inflect. I'd need a bulletin in front of me to demonstrate what I'm talking about. But if you want to emphasise a point, you need to express yourself in a particular way.
Well, it's knowing what word to highlight and pre-reading and, being able to, as you say, communicate rather than just read the words on the paper.
Yeah, it's not words off a piece of paper. It's what I used to teach my apprentice broadcasters, if you like, was, especially with news reading, to say to yourself before you go on and read the news, this is interesting. It's also important. I think you'll find it interesting. I know what it's all about, and now I'm going to tell you.
But do people waste when they're reading it? Do they spend an hour preparing it and then just throw it away?
Oh, yes, they do. So many of them do. And that's what irks me. And probably a whole lot of other former broadcasters who watch and listen. The use of the English language is another one. So many of them have never been taught how to correctly use the English language. They talk about a lot of the news readers, not all of them. I mean, I'm generalising here. Refer to a place called Australia. Now, I don't know where Australia is. I know where Australia is. In fact, I live there.
Or Australia.
Oh,
yes, that's one of my pet hates.
Well, I don't like Australia. It's Australia.
Yeah.
There's an L in there. You've got to pronounce the L. You don't have to highlight it. You just pronounce it. Put it there. It's not meant to be highlighted. Another one, the use of the definite and indefinite articles of speech. You don't say, well, they do. The police officer, and it should be just the police. The police arrested a man on his way to a shop. Those words are never meant to be emphasised.
Do they understand what they're reading then? Do you think that there's just that disconnect?
Probably. Yeah, that's a fair way of putting it. The shot is to attach the letter A as an A onto the next word. Instead of a man, it's a man. So the word is A-M-A-N. That's how you spell a man. I went to the shop to buy a loaf of bread. Not I went to the shop to buy a loaf of bread.
Is that the difference, though, between communicating and someone just reading the words?
Oh, cripes, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there not enough education these days, do you think, to teach people how to communicate in the media in general?
I think so. I think you've nailed it there. My wife won't let me listen to the radio when we're driving the car together. Because I'll hear somebody say something, especially reading news, but even in commercials, and I'll yell at the radio, "Where did you learn to speak English? Did your teacher know how to speak English properly?"
Is it not an evolution that you're tending not to move with the times?
Yes.
Back in the day, radio, we were spinning records, and you were doing sort of, as you say, the large ones, but these days it's push of a button, it's computerised.
Yes, but I don't think the technology should be affecting the way broadcasters speak. I can't see the reason for that at all. If you listen to the radio today and then cast your mind back to, all right, let's go to the day I started, August the 7th, 1957. The same thing was coming out of the radio. Music, time calls, commercials, the announcer announcing the records, or back announcing them, which I prefer, and it's the same today on a music station. On a talk station, slightly different situation, but it's still people talking to people. Sure, the equipment's different. The standard of microphones has moved on, improved out of sight.
Tremendously.
It's still basically the same sound, or the same output from the little thing that you've got in the corner of your room called a radio. That's if you've got any, and so many people don't even have them these days. I've got about 40 at my place, and some of them actually work. What came out of the radio in 1957 or 1937 is much the same as comes out of the radio today. It's just that the programming has changed, the technology has changed, but you don't notice the difference that the technology has been able to produce.
What happened that first day when you walked into 2RG in Griffith and you had great expectations? What happened on that first day and in those early days of radio?
Oh, scared stiff. I walked in there, there's a bloke on the air sitting at the desk. You can see his feet underneath you. And he had his feet in a dish of water. It was the middle of summer. And if you know, west of the ranges in Eastern Australia, it gets very hot. And no air conditioning, nothing like that. And not even a fan, because the fan blows the air around and
makes a noise.
And particularly in those days when we were using ribbon microphones, it wasn't a good idea at all, because the ribbon had rattled backwards and forwards. But that was the beginning. My first shift, I can't even remember what it was, but I remember I hadn't been there that long, and I found myself doing breakfast radio. Breakfast radio means getting up at before the sun is up, obviously. In those days we used to go on the air at 6 officially, and we'd go from there. But to know whether we were on the air or not, I just did not have the smarts. I didn't have the technical expertise to believe what the needles were telling me on the link to the transmitter. It was an AWA setup, and to get the radio station on the air, you'd press a key switch down, and with a telephone dial, you'd dial 02604, and that would fire up the transmitter. It'd come on the air, and you were in business. I didn't understand that that was definitely going to work. So rather than get caught, I brought a portable radio, a small portable radio, in, tuned it onto the station's frequency, a spot on the dial, and opened the microphone. And if the microphone went squeak, I knew that we were on the air. Just straight feedback from microphone to radio receiver. We're on the air, okay, I can fly.
How did you enjoy it when you were doing those things? You were generally a station all-rounder in those days.
Oh yes.
What was the bit that really floated your boat?
Playing music that I liked. And talking about, not so much talking about, but talking to people, or back announcing records music that I liked.
Did you get much notoriety in those days of people recognising you and going, "Hey John, heard you on the radio, sounded great"?
You did, but you didn't get quite those words. What would happen? You'd be walking down the street, and you'd see someone on the other side pointing, and they were saying to each other, "There's the new radio announcer. He's very good," or
"We don't like him."
we don't like him, or whatever. I can remember one thing that I did that I tell a story against myself. We were in, my mentor and his wife and myself had gone to Leeton for the day. We were in the entrance area of this place, and they happened to be a sponsor of the radio station. The word sponsor these days is usually associated with
Community
radio, but a sponsor is what an advertiser was. He was virtually sponsoring the program because he was paying money. So I started to do a commercial that I knew that this particular business had on our radio station. But I did it within hearing of somebody in the street just nearby. And I did it so that they could hear me saying that. In other words, I was blowing my own trumpet. And Brian, my mentor, Brian Stoneman, fantastic guy, he, when they had left, he said, if I ever hear you do what you just did again, I will, I don't know, he didn't say what he was going to do, but he gave me to understand that he did not appreciate me blowing my own trumpet. And that's fair enough. They say that you've arrived in radio when you can listen to yourself on the air out of a pre-recorded program and listen to yourself and turn it off. You don't have to listen to yourself. But that's, we're getting into a different area of human existence there.
What did your mentor teach you?
He taught me to communicate with people, talk to people. He taught me a degree of humility. Only recently, a guy called Jeff Marshall, who was, I call him my grandfather in radio. Jeff was working at 2RG, and he left, had the most fantastic voice you've ever heard in your life.
And that's you saying it?
Oh, that's me saying that. Oh, yeah. Jeff, he used to communicate with people so well. He left 2RG. He was replaced by a guy called Ian Davidson, and I replaced Ian. So Ian's my father in radio. Jeff Marshall's my grandfather in radio, if you'd like to use that analogy. And Jeff was such a self-effacing sort of fella. He never pushed his own barrow at all. He never tried to get into recorded commercials or what is called voiceovers these days. And most people haven't got the faintest idea why they're called voiceovers.
Why are they called voiceovers?
Because it started when television arrived. If you were doing a recorded commercial, it would be used, when it got to the television station, it'd be voice over film or voice over tape or voice over whatever. You've got the vision, as you know, and it has to be supported, in many cases, by voice. And so it became voice over film, voice over tape. And I think that's about all it was, the only two things. But that's how voiceovers became known as voiceovers. Nothing else at all. Anyway, Jeff didn't push himself to become a recorded commercial expert, a Kevin Goldsby. He could have been. He just didn't. He didn't have that spark, that drive. He just didn't need to. He didn't want to. What he wanted to do was simply be on the air, communicating with people and doing a program. And he did them so well. He didn't say, here is so-and-so playing so-and-so and so-and-so. He'd quite often use a different way of speaking. He'd try to involve the listener. I remember hearing him say, but I can't think of it. He said, don't you like the use of piano in this typical show band arrangement of Vincent Newman's Tea for Two by Andre Kostelanetz, and let the record go? So he's saying, don't you like what I'm going to play? Don't you like what is happening in this record? And you'd automatically say, yes, I do, or no, I don't, or what the hell's he talking about? But that sort of thing involved the listener.
It's part of the theatre that you were talking about.
Part of the theatre, exactly.
So from 2RG, you moved on?
I came up to, I returned to Brisbane, where I grew up, and was working at 4BH.
How did you get into 4BH in the first place? Because these days, to get into capital city is the pinnacle for a lot of people, and you've gone from 2RG to Brisbane radio. How did it all happen?
I used to listen to 4BH a lot. I got to know the way they did things, and I sent a tape, not a cassette tape, but a reel-to-reel tape of my work to Alan Brandt, who was the program manager. I think they call them content directors these days. I suppose that's a fair enough word, but program is the same thing. And he was the program manager. He sent me back a letter saying, "Dear John, we don't have any suitable vacancies at the present time."
You got a Dear John letter.
Got a Dear John letter. And should a suitable vacancy occur, we will be interested in quickly contacting you. And I thought, those words have a bit of meaning. Maybe he will. These days, when you make an application for a job, you're lucky to get an answer.
Why is that?
Oh, people in business these days, a lot of them. But again, this is generalising. They don't care. I mean, this is the bloke we want to employ. I'll send him a letter and get him in. But they forget the manners, the good manners, the decency of living. To write to the other and say something like, "Unfortunately, your application was unsuccessful this time."
I could have just about wallpapered a wall with all my knockbacks back in the day.
Well, at least they sent you a knockback. These days you don't get it, so the wall would be unpapered.
Because I remember back in the day, I never seemed to apply for a job and get them. It was word of mouth. It was someone you knew. It's right place in the right time. When were you in the right place at the right time?
At 4BH, I was doing Ring a Request, which was obviously a request program that you rang up for, and it was the biggest in Australia at the time. They'd ring up, within seconds the record they wanted would be on the air. These days the same thing happens, but in a much quicker, a technologically perfect way. In those days, a request would be made, a slip of paper would go into the record library, and they would find through the alphabetical system where that record was, bring it into me, and I'd play it and say hello to Mrs. Bloggs of wherever.
A lot less stress these days.
Collectively, there was stress then for the record library people, but not for me. I just got the record, played the thing on the air, and that was it.
So you say then you were in the right place at the right time.
Okay. There was a bloke who was working for us at 4BH doing nights, and he was called Leighton Rowlands. And he was going to work at 4LM Mount Isa. And he thought I would be excellent as a assistant manager 2IC at 4LG Longreach, which was the other station in that network at the time. He approached me and made the suggestion that I think about going out to work at 4LG Longreach in the middle of nowhere. Well, not nowhere, middle of Queensland. Queensland's not nowhere.
It was the middle of nowhere.
But a hell of a long way from anywhere. And I thought to myself, here I am on a top-rated program in the middle of this capital city, and this guy wants me to go out and work as a 2IC at a bush station, which has an audience of 5 people. I was so wrong. It had a big audience. It covered more than a third of the state's total area. Admittedly, there weren't a lot of people in that area, but there were definitely people from places down from Charleville, which had its own radio station, right up to Cloncurry. And there were certain overlaps, of course, but it covered a very big part of Queensland, and was a very well thought of station. At the time, I didn't care. I didn't want to go there. He said, "Will you come and meet Frank Moore?" Frank Moore was the managing director of this Central Queensland Broadcasting Network, 4LM and 4LG, later on to embrace 4IP at Ipswich, just on the outskirts of Brisbane. And the idea was that I would go there for 12 months and then come back as 2IC or manager, whichever, at 4IP, because 4IP was being purchased at that stage. And I thought about it for a while, and I went to visit Frank Moore in his office a couple of times. And the second time, I said, yes, I'll come. And I'm glad I did, because it was that stepping stone that led me on to the rest of what I consider to be a pretty happy career.
What did you learn going to Longreach?
You don't make wholesale changes just for the sake of them. But that still happens today.
Oh, wow, wasn't that my fall down?
I learnt that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there was nothing wrong with 4LG. It was working quite well. I oversaw what was occurring, and I thought, no, that's got to be changed. That's got to be changed. But it didn't need to be changed in most cases. And I thank 4LG for teaching me that, because I know I would have hurt a couple of people by insisting that they change to suit me, not so much to change to suit the business of broadcasting or the listeners. I mean, let's face it, the listeners are your bosses in the broadcasting business. It doesn't matter what your employer says. Your real boss is the guy milking a cow in a cow shed of a morning with the radio on. He's your boss. Because if he doesn't like what you're playing or what you're saying, he can just turn you off or find another station, and you're left with nothing. And I guess that was the big lesson I learned. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And as an adjunct, your real boss is the listener.
4IP, so you moved from Longreach back to Brisbane.
Yep.
How did that all happen?
I drove a car.
Good on you.
One like that.
Actually, it's one like that. It's behind us.
Not quite. Oh, it's there, is it? Oh, yeah, okay, hello. Crikey. Well, during that year, that 12 months that I went to Longreach for, I shouldn't end a sentence like that, we got married. I got married to a woman who which is unusual these days. What happened was my wife and I came back to live in Ipswich, because at that stage the newly acquired station 4IP was still headquartered in Ipswich.
So it was I remember back in the day, before it became, or after, the fact that it was in Ipswich, it was sort of a poor cousin to some of the Brisbane stations. Is that would you subscribe to that? Well,
up to a point. It was a relay station for a time of 4BK. 4BK used to relay to 4IP various programs and what have you, and but it was still a very independent radio station. And in fact, we ditched 4BK soon after I arrived. That wasn't my decision, but it was probably the right decision just the same.
How did that affect you going from Longreach to 4IP, where the notoriety must have started to have built?
I wasn't specifically building a personal profile. I was more interested in the radio station itself. We had a job to do. Our job was to make 4IP the best it possibly could be. And we were prepared, and we did take on the big boys, the 4BHs, the 4BCs, 4BK, 4KQ. We took them on and we beat them. We started the beginning of the battle, or the battle started to be won during an afternoon program which was done on Saturday afternoons by David Greenwood. David Greenwood was a guy who worked at 4BH before he came to us, 4IP, And he had a wonderful voice, still does. I still see him from time to time. And David was doing this Saturday afternoon requests. And you would see kids lined up in Brisbane, Ipswich and wherever at phone boxes, public phone boxes, because not everybody had a phone. We're talking 1963, 4, 5. And they were wanting to get through to our switch girl to get a record played on the air in David's program. And that just happened.
Why did it take off like that?
Because the other stations were playing, they were running races and other sport. And kids of 14, 15, 16 don't want that. They weren't interested in races, horse races. They were interested in music. And we gave it to them. Or David did, or the station did, the radio station, we. And David was the guy who was in the front line.
What about yourself? What were you doing at that stage?
I think I was doing breakfast radio in those days. And it was not long after that I gravitated to the 4IP newsroom when we started to build a newsroom of our own rather than rely on news relayed from other places.
Why news?
I don't know. I guess it was because news is a thing that the actual word itself says it. New. It's something that'll. Whenever you go to read the news, someone that's listening to you hasn't heard it before. Maybe most people have, but they just want to know what's occurring. Are we at war yet? What's happening? Is there an earthquake? Has the sea engulfed Australia yet? You know, I know I'm talking rubbish, but they want to know what's happening. And so do I. I want to know what's happening with the weather as well. And so do most people. And I wanted to tell them. And I figured that I could do that. So I gravitated towards news. But that didn't mean that I didn't get a bit of a kick out of playing music.
So you were still doing music while you were doing news at 4IP?
Yes, we were doing both and enjoying it. Just enjoying communicating with people. And getting feedback, getting people saying, ringing up and saying, I heard you on the news this morning, or I heard you playing records. That one of Cliff Richard's terrific. Whatever.
So you enjoyed the congratulations?
I did, of course.
There's a joke there. Cliff Richard.
Okay. You can have that.
Thank you.
If you'd said summer holiday, I would have been.
Yeah, good on you. But okay, you've brought in the xylophone, and what was the story behind that?
I don't know how these things ever started to become part of every radio studio in the world, certainly in Australia. But you'd use them if you're doing 2 live commercials. You'd finish off one. And you can get it now. They're available at all chemists and some bakeries. It's 3 minutes past 2 at 4IP, and here's so and so and so and so. It would be like a full stop and an exclamation mark. And coming up to news, you'd bang the gongs. To RG, it's 3 minutes past 2. We're 3 minutes late with the news. It was a device to introduce something, whatever it may be. Just one dong like that might be a breaking point between 2 live commercials, or 2 live voiceovers, if you want to use that. Every station had them. They weren't called the xylophone. They are a musical instrument, but they were just simply called the gongs. And I bought these are the. There were 2 sets of gongs that I bought for 2RG. No. For 4IP. 2 sets of gongs. And this is one of those. When gongs went out of vogue, these went to me because I bought them.
So you've also brought the old 4IP jacket in.
Well, this is an interesting jacket. This was what the 4IP sound guys, we didn't call ourselves good guys in those days, but this is what the 4IP sound guys had to wear. We didn't particularly desire to do this, but we were told by our bosses to wear these when we were out and about doing outside broadcasts and at the Brisbane exhibition. In fact, it was the Brisbane exhibition of about 1964, 3, not sure, that we all had to wear these. And they were all red, and just like this, a little pocket on the side. And this little guy was the court jester. He was called the Hippie Ippie. The Hippie Ippie. IP, Ippie. And we were so self-conscious, us broadcasters, us good guys, or sound guys as we were called then, that if we wanted to go outside the building, we still had to wear them. If we wanted to go outside the building at the exhibition where we were, one would say to the other, "I want to go to the loo. Do you want to accompany me down the way?" Because we didn't like to go out on our own. We felt so damn self-conscious.
What was the reaction to them?
Oh, most people liked them. And there were other colours. There were blue ones, and eventually gold-coloured ones. At one stage, we were dressed all in white, white suits, and then gold suits. I haven't got mine. I don't know what happened to those, but I do have this jacket, which doesn't fit me. It fits somebody else. But I thought, no, it's not going to go to the rubbish. We'll save that.
I do remember the gold jacket. I have seen it.
Well, it's still at my place, and it still fits. And so does the blue one. This one would if it were mine, but it's not.
With 4IP, you were an all-rounder still, so where did you move to from there?
From 4IP...
how long did that last for?
Oh, about 17 years.
Wow.
17, 18, something like that.
What was the highlight or highlights?
Oh, the 1974 flood. Unquestionably. 4IP ran the 1974 flood. I can say that without any shadow of a doubt. The other stations were there. I can even remember the ABC at Toowong. They got partially flooded, and they were going on like saying things like, "Oh, look, there's water coming in the studio." Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? You're going to be drowned in about 10 minutes. Get out of the joint.
What did 4IP in those days, in the 74 floods, what did they do better than everybody else?
We had just about everybody who could drive a car driving one of the 4IP radio cars, two-way radio, hook-up things. And we were we were just on the streets everywhere, finding out from key people, from emergency service personnel, what was happening, where the flood was worse, what recommendations there were, what to tell people about their immediate future, where the water was going to be, and that sort of thing. There was a classic piece of broadcasting, a fellow called Ray McGregor.
And there's a name from the past, a great voice.
Another guy with a fantastic voice,
Yeah.
Ray McGregor.
I remember he used to wear around a T-shirt that, was it Alan McGirvin? Alan McGirvin wears, or Mickey Mouse wears an Alan McGirvin watch.
Oh, that was Alan.
Sorry, Ray McGregor.
He's still around, and he's got a fantastic voice. Absolutely fantastic. Mind you, it's not essential to have a fantastic voice in the broadcasting business.
But it helps.
But it helps. And when you get deaf, like I am, it's a good voice coming out of the radio that you can understand better than a high-pitched journalist Sheila from woman. Can't use that for that. I don't know what you're going to do with this. It's a good voice a voice with a bit of depth,
Bit of clarity.
or certainly clarity. Or you can get good voices that mumble. We're talking about this. I said, what the hell are you talking about?
It's the best you've ever sounded.
Thank you. You'll keep, but not for long. Back to the voice business. A good voice is not essential. The key to it is the brain. What am I going to do with this voice? How am I going to use it? That's the key to it. So a good voice isn't essential. It's what you do with it.
Where do you fit in Brisbane radio?
Where do I fit in?
Yeah, what are your highlights?
Oh, heck, I don't think I've got any. Look, somebody must have thought I did have. The day I retired, the Brisbane Lord Mayor rang up. Quite a few people rang up. And
Well, that was where you'd done the 49 years in radio.
yes. I had just completed 49 years that month. And the Lord Mayor rang up and said something along the lines of, John, it's a pleasure to be with you on the radio this morning.
Who was the Brisbane Lord Mayor at the time?
Campbell Newman it was.
Mm.
He said, I appreciate the things you've done in the broadcasting business in this city, and I think the city is better for you having been part of it. And I would like to wish you well for the future, and within the next month I would like to present you with the keys of the city.
Must have been a big honour.
Oh, it knocked me out. I couldn't speak. I thought, why is somebody giving me the key of the city? What have I done? I've just done my job.
You're a name that's synonymous, though, with Brisbane radio.
With some people, yes. But let's face it, there are people who would never have heard me on radio. People who listen to the ABC exclusively, fine. They would never have heard of John Knox. They may have heard my voice because I did do some stuff on the ABC, not much.
You got into commercial production as well, fairly heavily. What got you into that, and how did that sustain you over your career?
In those days, it was a fairly well-paid thing. You'd do a commercial. The very first commercial I did was for Tristram's. I think, from a Brisbane point of view, the drinks with the ring-a-ding flavour. That was a voiceover job on television. And it went from there. I think I got £4 for that. That eventually became up as high as £400 for some people in the broadcasting business. I don't think I ever got paid that much. But I enjoyed interpreting somebody's ideas and conveying their message through the microphone and through whatever's in here to a potential listener, a potential customer.
You did a lot of TV commercials.
Yes.
And a lot of voiceovers for TV. Why didn't you move into TV? You did so much in radio. Was TV on the spectrum for you?
Not really. Well, yes and no. Val, my wife, she was one of the first. She was the second person hired by Channel 9. She was the second person on their staff, and she was only there for 2 or 3 years, and she moved to Longreach as the boss's secretary, and the rest is history, as they say. But I was kind of interested in television. I put it on a pedestal, though. I have a habit of doing that sort of thing, which I should never have done. It's just another medium. It was the coming thing, though, and I thought, am I up to this? I don't know. I don't think so. I'll stay with radio. It was self-doubt, I guess. But I did have a crack at it at one stage. I did a news audition, but unfortunately I was so damn nervous that I developed a tic in the eye. You know, the eye would move, and it just looked off-putting, and I couldn't do anything about that. And I think that was what stopped me from pursuing it any further.
Just the nerves.
Yeah, I guess so. I think I could do the job. In fact, I'm sure I could do the job, but I didn't.
What do you like to listen to, though, in general in radio these days? What's the thing that you get the most enjoyment out of?
If I'm sitting up the backyard throwing the ball to my dogs, and I'm a dog person, I love dogs, I've got the radio going, I want to listen to music, that's all. I don't want to listen to, unless there's a major news story on, I'll tune on to a station that's producing that sort of information.
What sort of music do you listen to? You've listened to music all your life. You've played music all your life. What do you listen to?
Something that's easy. I was never a great rock and roll fan, although I do admire people like the Bee Gees, the Beatles, and others.
Because that's what you were playing back in the 4IP days.
Yes, that doesn't say I was enjoying it though. I enjoy something that's easy to listen to. If you put a Tommy Dorsey record in front of me, I'd play that ahead of anything else. Possibly Glenn Miller and big bands, music of the 40s and early 50s. Nat King Cole, Perry Como, that sort of. You probably haven't even heard of half of these yourself. But they're easy listening music, ballads, that sort of thing.
17 years at 4IP playing music that you didn't always like. Why did you leave?
Because 4IP was eventually sold by those wonderful bosses that I still admire to 2SM in Sydney. And 2SM sent a bloke up here to run the joint, and he had the attitude that I had when I first went to 4LG. Let's change this and fix it. Wasn't broke. You don't lift up the bonnet of the car and fix it if it's working. And there was nothing wrong with 4IP at the time, but this guy thought that he could make himself a name by turning 4IP into a Sydney station. That's the basic way that's what I perceive anyway. That's how I read it.
So what happened then?
Well, we lost audience. What goes in Brisbane doesn't necessarily go in Sydney, and what goes in Sydney not always goes in Brisbane or Queensland in general. But this guy didn't see it that way at all. His attitude was, without admitting it, I grew up in Sydney, this is what Sydney's doing, this is what everybody should be doing.
What was the difference then between Sydney radio and Brisbane radio in those days?
Oh, just a difference in music. Some music that would take off in Sydney would not necessarily take off in Brisbane, for a variety of reasons. I can't give you any one of them, but it didn't. It just, that's how it was.
So after 4IP, you moved on to 4BK at that stage?
Yes, I did. That was basically to escape from what I saw as a sinking ship. You don't stay on a sinking ship until you're suffocating, drowning, and it was a heartbreak thing. The staff who were at 4IP in the days where we were making waves, where we were taking over the Brisbane radio market, those guys had done their job, and now all that wonderful work was being thrown out the door by these people from Sydney.
So you went on to 4BK, and that was really...
it was all news.
But it was being in the right place at the right time again.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
4BK, though, became with Wayne Roberts at the helm doing breakfast, was one of the headline stations.
Oh, yes, and you mentioned the name Wayne Roberts. You've got to attach another name there, John Miller. Both those guys, John Miller was the head of the newsroom when I went to work for him. Those two people had such great ability, tremendous brains, tremendous quick-fire thinking.
Or was John Andy's brother Mark?
And Mark, of course. And they did things on 4BK breakfast that just wouldn't happen today.
How'd they get away with it?
Well, they just did. I can recall one particular time when Wayne Roberts was talking to people driving in on the Southeast Freeway, and he was saying things like, "Now, what we've done, we can see you as you're driving in. We've got cameras lined up because we like to see our audience. We like to know who we're talking to. And I can see a bloke in it. Don't do that." And everyone would know that the bloke was either picking his nose or scratching himself inappropriately, or what. He was like the Australian cricketers were staying at a particular pub, a hotel in Brisbane, and he rang up to speak to one of the players, I forget who, but he wasn't available. And he said, "Well, can you put me through to Kim Hughes?" And "I'll try." And Kim Hughes answered the phone. And Kim Hughes swore rather violently when John Miller, who was also in on this particular thing, said things to him like he was putting on a silly voice. He'd say, "Oh, Mr. Hughes," and you couldn't do that in those days because you haven't a crack at a particular line of people. "Mr. Hughes, it's a very difficult game, cricket. Does your mother mind you playing cricket? I mean, you might get hurt." And Kim Hughes thought, "Why the hell is this idiot?" And he said so. "Who the is this?" And he dropped the magic word, and he was then banned for 3 days. As it turned out, it was Friday. So he was banned for the rest of Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And he's back on Monday. So it didn't matter. But they used to do these things. McGurven did another thing on whether it was 4IP or 4BK. He was on both at various times. He had this. He'd bring up people. They were called gotcha calls. And he rang this bloke who had just got a new car, which was the pride of his life. And he made out that he was the chief mechanic at this place. He rang up and he said, "Oh, is that Dave Smith?" "Oh, yeah, this is Dave Smith. Dave, you've got your car in with us for a service, and is your car insured?" "Yes, it's insured, of course." Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, I don't know how to put this, Dave, but your car's fallen off the bloody hoist." And the fella said, "It's what?" And he was, all over, very upset. McGurven said, "It's all right, Dave. This is Alan McGurven." And he played a little bit of music to indicate that he'd been gotcha'd. And he'd do things like that. And they were all fun.
Has the fun gone out of radio?
Yeah. Yeah, it has.
Why is that?
Oh, because of current society, I think. Current thinking, current people. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
With radio where it's going these days, do you think radio will die out?
Sometimes I think it will. Yeah, I just hope it doesn't die out.
Because when you were working at places like 4BK, you're talking about the pranks and the vibe. How was the vibe to work at those stations when they were really just on fire?
It was fantastic. You didn't go to work. You went to a place called 4IP where things were happening, and you were part of that. You meaning anybody who was working there. There are still people who worked at 4IP who meet regularly in Brisbane and share a few jokes, tell a few lies,
What's the vibe like working at those places when they are really on fire and you're rating? And
No, it's just it's an experience. It's a great feeling of achievement. Well, we enjoyed it so much that we didn't want to get paid for doing things after hours.
It does help.
Well, it's a fact.
Yeah.
Almost one of the big things that made 4IP was the fact that if there was a bun fight anywhere, a school fete, even a church fete, and they wanted 4IP to be there, we'd be there. I can remember one particular weekend we did about 14 different fetes or functions at outside organisations. We were there. We weren't the highlight, but we certainly were. There was a fair bit of focus on us. They'd see 4IP everywhere. We had Sunday fun days. We had, and that was a regular feature. We did concerts with the top bands of the day.
You were talking a little earlier about when you did retire. You were working at 4KQ. That was a halcyon time as well when you were working there. You seem to have just had the Midas touch when it comes to picking radio stations.
Oh, well, almost. The 4KQ, 4IP and 4KQ were the best radio stations I've ever worked for, the most enjoyable stations I've ever worked for, the best bosses I've ever worked for. The 4KQ experience was one that I was sad to say goodbye to. I was sad to say goodbye to radio in general, but KQ was terrific. It really was. There's marvellous people there.
With the evolution of radio, you started off, of course, in AM 2RG. FM evolved during your time in radio. Why didn't you look at the FM dial and move into that sphere?
I did have an experience with FM.
An experience.
4BK became B105, and all the staff became B105 employees, including me. The thing that I found rather strange, the news director who came in over the top of me at B105 told me, we're moving to FM next week. Yes, I know that. You'll find that you'll have to form your words differently and watch your breathing on FM because it's clearer than AM. Up to a point he was right, but basically it's a lot of rubbish. I mean, you're talking into a microphone and something's coming out the other end. If it's good quality, if it's better quality than previously, so be it.
You can hear the floors better.
You can hear the floors better. You can hear tapping on the desk better. And mouth noises, for instance. Yeah.
Did you stay there long, or that was one of the reasons that you left?
No, I got the sack. They brought a bloke up from Sydney who was there to prove himself, and his first impression of me was a guy who was pretty much older than everybody else. I mean, I might have been about 50 then. Real old. Walking down the passage at B105 with a cup of coffee in my hand. That was his first impression of me. That impression stayed every time he heard me read the news. That guy's too old for us. No, you got to go. And but he got rid of me. Straight after that, when I was immediately available for somebody else to employ, I got a phone call from CFM on the Gold Coast, and I worked there for as a spare tyre for a couple of years. Then I got a call from Bob Gallagher at 4KQ, and he asked me if I'd come and leave that station and come and work for him, which I did, and I enjoyed it.
The media merry-go-round where people do move, it's a little different these days to what it was like back when you were first in radio, and for a long time. You get sacked these days from a station, you get sacked essentially from 50. What was it like for you moving around? Was there job security? Did you always feel secure in your job?
No.
Do you want to think about that for 2 or 3
Well, at the time I was, wherever I was working, I was always thinking, what I do here, the length of time I'm going to keep this job is entirely up to me. However, if they don't like what I'm doing, they'll get rid of me. So I've got to try to work out exactly what it is that they want, and I found that difficult. And I mean, it might sound completely ridiculous and simple, but I found that to be a very big challenge.
Was that an ego thing that you just didn't have that presence, or you didn't feel enough presence because you were always well respected where you were?
Yeah, I don't know what it was, Mark. I was just conscious of the fact that I did not want to be unemployed. I had a family of 4 kids, a wife and 4 kids, sort of thing, to shepherd through life, and I could not afford to be out of work, and I was scared that somebody like this goose from Sydney who came up and fired me at B105 would happen again. So it was always there, the thought. There's a thing about that radio people have: never go on holidays in radio because you'll come back and your job's gone.
I think that's media in general, isn't it?
Oh, possibly. Yeah, well, it is. It is. Yeah, it's media in general. Happens on television.
You did a lot of commercial work over your time. You've been awarded for that. How important is the award structure in the whole gamut of what you've done over the years?
Oh, it's not important at all.
The recognition is good, though.
Oh, it's nice if somebody says, yes, you've done a good job, and if you get an award which says basically that, it's nice to receive. Of course it is.
Because that Goldie Award that you got many years ago.
Oh, some people have got dozens of Goldie Awards. That was for the best voice in Brisbane radio at the time.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And sorry, it meant a lot to me at the time. And I suppose as time has gone by, I can look at that. Well, I don't know where it is at the moment. Oh, yes, I do, and say yes, I did work hard at that. I tried hard to achieve the best possible result for the people who were paying the money to get me to advertise their product, and that is what it's all about. That is what that's where the enjoyment is. I think the satisfaction, just the same as if you're working as an announcer for a radio station, and a particular advertiser is using your program to push his goods and services, and you go to that. You go there with the sales guy to meet him, and you understand his business, what he's doing, and you can convey that through the microphone and the speaker at the other end, and get some results for him. That's satisfaction. If you can, by using your voice and your brain, both together hopefully, explain that Bloggs' timber yard has got the timber that you're going to want for a particular job. Even if you don't think that they have, go and have a look, because the chances are they've got it. And if they haven't got it, they'll get it for you.
You talk about a great voice. You don't need one.
No.
What about people that don't have such a great voice? What would you say to them?
If you are interested in getting into the broadcasting business, pursue that goal right to the nth degree, and get in touch with somebody who's either in the business or has been in the business, and get that person to assist you.
Because you've taught a lot of people over the years. You had Air TV, which was Queensland's premier radio school at the time.
Yes, it was. And it was started by Jim Iliff, who was the very first children's television presenter in Queensland on Channel 9. Jim started this with a guy called Ivor Hancock, who was How the hell are you going to get rid of that? You better cut it straight back to me. You stop laughing and I'll get on with it.
No.
Oh, bugger.
Oh, too much.
Ivor was a member of the broadcasting fraternity and was with Jim in Air TV, which was originally the Brisbane School of Broadcasting. And when he retired, Jim asked me if I'd like to join his organisation. And I said, I'll give it a go. And so we did. We didn't make much money. In fact, we hardly made any money because we weren't charging enough. And nowhere near enough for what they're charging these days in places down south. But we did put a lot of people on the air. I could go through the names if I had a list, but I haven't. I can think of a few off the top of my head.
Well, there's a couple of big names in Brisbane at the moment. That, Andrew Lofthouse.
Andrew Lofthouse. Andrew was one of ours. He showed promise right from the word go. A very quiet guy. Shelley Lloyd, who was a newsreader at the ABC until only recently. Steve, I can't think of his name. It's terrible. Don't. He's also on the ABC. Steve, he's an interviewer, very good. Steve on the ABC is also very good.
He says big things about you too, John.
Yeah, I'm glad of that. I'm glad. However, we'll let that pass. We'll have to because I can't find his name. But there have been a lot of names. I guess it's the brain's getting too old and we can't access the filing cabinets anymore.
But it's great to have got so many people a start in the media. It must be something that you can really hang your shingle on these days.
Possibly. I don't think about it much at all. I just if I hear anybody who I know that I've been instrumental in assisting on their journey, I feel pretty good. I helped that guy, or he was one of my students. That gives me a little bit of satisfaction.
Because I remember as a just fresh out of school. Actually, I think I did the course when I was actually in school.
I think you did, yes.
And went straight out to 4LG in Longreach. And I remember the atmosphere that it portrayed, and it didn't let me down. No. The atmosphere that is in media and radio and television, it's something else.
It's got something, isn't it? It's a bit hard to define, but it's just there. So much so, I don't know how many people who work in a timber yard would go back after their shift and hang around, whereas in the broadcasting business, especially when you're new, I know in my own case, I'd go back into the studios at 2RG at Griffith, and at 4LG, and at 4BH, and just about everywhere, and be there, even though I wasn't necessarily required to be there, just to cop the atmosphere, just to be part of the scene, to be there, and you'd find a whole lot of other people who are of the same mind, who weren't rostered to be there, but were there anyway. And that, I think that still happens today. I don't know. If it doesn't, I'm sorry for the people.
Does it worry you, though, that a lot of radio jobs are now syndicated and they're going by the wayside? News is syndicated, radio stations are syndicated. What do you think when you look at that?
I'm horrified by it. I don't want to know what's happening in Sydney if I live in Longreach. I want to know what's happening at the Commercial Hotel in Longreach, or at Strathnair Station, or Bexley, or anywhere in the area, the Wellshot Creek, the Wellshot Hotel, all these. That's what I want to know about, because I live in Longreach. I don't live at Petersham in Sydney.
Radio is local.
That's how it should be.
It's not now, though.
It is some of the community-based stations. You know, the community stations. They have the opportunity of capitalising on this need for localness, if you like. I don't know what the right word is, but it's not localness. That's what it means, though. They have that opportunity. But they need guidance. Oh, brother, do they need guidance.
Away from radio, you're an avid aviator.
Yes.
What got you into that in the first place?
Oh, just a desire to fly. I've always wanted to fly, and I had the opportunity. I started learning to fly in 1956 in Tiger Moths, when my family, my mum, dad, and myself, were in Melbourne, and I went out to Moorabbin and I started flying Tiger Moths, scared stiff, but I wanted to do it, and I finished after about 6 hours. Circumstances didn't allow me to continue, and it wasn't until about 1973 at Archerfield that I was able to get back into the driver's seat and learn to fly. Different aeroplane altogether, although subsequently I did end up getting my endorsement on a Tiger Moth at Caboolture. No, I just love flying.
Because you may not have, if circumstances had been different. You nearly pursued a military career.
Very close. You know too much. Well, let's go back to basics, if you'd like to do that. I fancied myself as a fleet air arm pilot. I'm a bit horrified to think about that now. But back in the day, as it were, what were they flying? Sea Furies and Fireflies off the Melbourne and the Sydney. And I wanted to be part of that in the driver's seat. But I was about 16, maybe 15 or 16. I decided that all those people who said that you shouldn't look at the eclipse of the sun, what would they know? Because they're just old people. Wouldn't have a clue. So I covered up my left eye and looked at the eclipse of the sun this particular day. And I said, oh yeah, there is a big bite out of the sun. Little did I know, it was also taking a bite out of my right eye. And the next day at school, there was a line on the board, and I'm looking at it, and I thought, looks a bit fuzzy where I'm looking. So I covered up this eye again, and right where my point of vision was, there was nothing. I immediately decided I had blown my chance to be a pilot in the Air Force or anything else, or the Fleet Air Arm. And I decided that. I shouldn't have done that. I should have got an optometrist to decide that, if it was going to be decided. Because subsequently I found out that it did heal itself a little bit, such that I could get myself a licence.
Do you wish you'd done that? That you'd gone for the military side of things?
Oh, it's hard to sort of say that. I'm reasonably satisfied with the life that I've lived in the environment I've lived. I've often thought, how would it have been if I'd either gone to Portsea, which I nearly did, Officer Cadet School, or pursued the Fleet Air Arm naval career. But it's hard to look down that time tunnel in reverse.
Because your father wanted you to follow in his footsteps.
Oh, right or wrong, I was an only child, and I mean, if you've only got one child, you put all your hopes and dreams and thoughts and everything into that child. You haven't got 3 or 4 to sort of say, oh, well, he mightn't make it, he might, you know. That's being a little bit cruel and unrealistic. But he, right or wrong, wanted me to go to Portsea and become an officer in the army. And unbeknownst to me, I was selected to go. At the same time, I decided I wanted to get into the broadcasting business, become a radio announcer. And I got home this particular day and said, Dad, I'm not going to worry about the career in the army. I don't know whether I'm going to be selected or not. And he just said, I happen to know you have been selected. And I said, well, I'm going to become a radio announcer. And he said, you what? And I said, I'm going to become a radio announcer. That's what I want to do. Everything up until that point of time had been following what he wanted. Everything that Dad wanted me to do, I did. Right from competitive swimming through to, well, anything. And he was horrified. I mean, what's a blasted radio announcer? You want to become one of those? And I said, yes. And he sort of threw up his hands in horror, and he had to withdraw my application for Portsea, which must have hurt him immensely.
Did he come to terms with it over time, seeing the way you went and what you achieved?
Yes. Yes, he did.
When was the time that he went, when you realised that he was at peace with your decision?
Oh, it's a hard one to say. I don't know. I guess when I found out that they were still living, Mum and Dad were still living in Melbourne at the time when I was at 2RG, and this is in retrospect, when I realised now and realised then that he'd been in touch with some of the radio people in the army and worked out how he could be able to listen to me on a home radio set coming all the way from 2RG at Griffith. Whoever it was in the radio field in the army that Dad was talking to told him how to rig up a special kind of aerial. I think it was a dipole, and he could pick up 2RG pretty well at night if he did that and had it in the right angle and all this sort of thing. And I thought, well, if he's going to that sort of trouble, then he must be fairly much at peace with what I've decided to do with my life.
Does it put a lot of pressure, or did it put a lot of pressure as a high flyer and a real achiever in Brisbane radio, as you were? What about your kids then? How did they live up to the John Knox persona as such?
That's a question I don't know how to answer. You really have to ask them individually. I know when I got sacked from B105 for being too old, my daughter Ruth was getting married around about that time, and one of her bridesmaids was introduced somebody else to Ruth, a friend of hers, also around about 20 years old or however old she was. And she said, this is Ruth Knox, her father's John Knox on the radio. And that child, 19-year-old kid, said, gee, is he as sexy in life as he sounds on the radio? And I thought, okay, that says it all. This idiot that fired me from B105 doesn't have a clue about radio, because it's the sound that you hear, not what you see.
What's the highlight, apart from the 74 floods when you were covering that? Do you have a highlight that you constantly, or there are highlights that you think about that you go, yeah, that was a lot of fun, or they were things that I really achieved?
Oh, look, it's hard to say. The people I've interviewed over the years, people I've met over the years, prime ministers, pop star, people like Jimmy Stewart, for instance. He was always a favourite of mine as a movie star. He also flew B-17s, I think it was B-17s or B-24s during the war over Germany and continental Europe in general. When I interviewed him by phone, and I asked him that particular day, I said, look, after this interview is over and the program is finished, I'm going out to Archerfield to do a little bit of flying. I've got a Bonanza all ready to fly. Would you like to come along? Because I knew he owned one. And he said, well, I can't take his voice off. Nobody can do it properly. I don't know. I've got things I've got to do today, John. But I sure would like flying with you in a Bonanza, a wonderful airplane. But to talk to him and relate to him, following all the movies I'd seen him in, was special. Cliff Richard was good to talk to. There's so many of them, I can't find them in the filing system. I met the Queen once and enjoyed that experience.
How was that? Talk us through that one.
Well, it's not much to talk through, really. I was asked, where was I at the time? I was working at KQ, I think. And the Queen and the Duke were here on a particular exercise, visit. And I got a phone call from the Premier's press secretary. John, would you like to join us in a reception for the Queen at this particular hotel in Brisbane next Wednesday afternoon? Yes, of course. And it was just a case of what to do and what not to do in the royal presence. And when you shake her hand, you don't squeeze it to death. Not that I do anyway. And yeah, it was an honour to meet the Queen and to talk to the Duke of Edinburgh, who was the Duke of Edinburgh. He was just as he always is, much maligned, but undeservedly so.
Is it something that you'd like to pass on with all the experience that you have? Would you still like to be doing that, to be sharing the knowledge that you've got? Is it something that...
Looking at a bloke 82 and a half years old, I wish you wouldn't use the word pass on. It does cause me a little bit of concern. My blood pressure is about normal, but I think it might have gone through the roof now. No, look, yeah, I'd love to pass it on to other people if they want to learn. But who wants to learn from an old fuddy-duddy?
I think a lot of people, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been a magnificent career. And I really, well, for the person that got me into the media in the first place, that'd be a good or a bad thing. But I do appreciate you sharing some time over the bonnet. John Knox, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Mark.